Danny Niederberger joins us today, members of Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace, to share with us his aspirations to unseat Todd Young in the U.S. Senate primary in 2022. Friends of Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace, you'll be very interested to hear Danny's perspective and platform points and his position on the sanctity of life, marriage, issues on critical race theory that are affecting kids in schools, as well as our freedoms as Americans. We all care about these things. Danny, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So why don't you share with our supporters a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Westfield, Indiana, right in the middle of Hamilton County. I come from a very big family. I'm one of 8 kids. I have 4 older sisters, an older brother, and 2 younger brothers. So very big family. I went to Westfield Public Schools my entire youth, graduated from Westfield High School. After that, I attended Purdue University, where I graduated with 2 degrees, one in accounting and one in management. After graduating from Purdue, I spent 2 years working at, I was a portfolio accountant for Wallington Asset Management, registered investment advisor here in Indianapolis. Basically, my main role there was to reconcile and keep track of about $750 million in assets down to the penny. It's a small firm. At one point in time, I was the only portfolio accountant on staff and the only one in the department. So I had a lot of responsibility on my shoulders from the very beginning. So I spent 2 years in that role, and then I actually moved down to Miami, Florida in January of 2017, and I took a position as a fund accountant for a hedge fund, Concise Capital Management.
Okay.
And I spent 2 years down in Miami, and then I wanted to move back to Indiana. And I'll never forget the day that I walked into my boss's office. He's one of the co-founders of the firm. And I explained to him that I wanted to move back home. And he understood. He was not from Miami. So he understood that, home is where the heart is. And he was really understanding in that. But he actually not only allowed me to keep my role at Concise Capital, but they actually expanded it. So currently, for the past 3 years, what I've been doing is I've been working remotely from Carmel, and I run the back office and the accounting departments for this hedge fund.
Wow, that is fantastic, Danny. That is a real testament to your, first of all, your discipline, to be offsite like that and to stay focused, because I think a lot of people understand during this pandemic how difficult it is to stay focused when you're working from home. But obviously they have a lot of confidence in you because they've expanded your responsibilities and have kept you on, and especially a hedge fund. I mean, folks, if you aren't aware of my background, I'm a CPA. I worked in public accounting for years. I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So when Danny talks about his role in accounting and running the back office, this requires amazing attention to detail, amazing accountability, responsibility, and being able to answer on a variety of different issues, not just technical issues, but to be able to be strategic as well. And I think people don't understand that about accountants. They have to be very strategic. So that's great. That's great, Danny. And a little about you personally. Why don't you share a little bit about you personally?
What do you mean?
Well, where where do you live now? Where do you practice your faith? I mean, any of that.
Okay. Well, so I live in Carmel now. Carmel, Westfield, right next to each other.
Sure.
I actually live 2 neighborhoods away from where I grew up. So.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Okay.
Actually, where I live now it's diagonal from Our Lady of Mount Carmel.
Oh my goodness. So
yeah.
folks that are listening, this young man shared with me, and he's really not that young. I'd like to say he's young compared to me, but he gets up and goes to the 7 a.m. mass, and that, I think, speaks volumes about his faith and his commitment to our Lord. And so, from my standpoint, that tells me a lot about him. But, why don't you share with our supporters and those that are interested, what are your key platform points? And since you are running against Todd Young, if you can maybe compare and contrast, those against Todd Young's.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three main pillars of the campaign is limited government, term limits, and reducing government debt and election integrity. Sorry, I was blanking there for a second.
That's all right. That's all right.
But limited government. I mean, you look at how our country was formed, and really the state and the local governments were supposed to have the most amount of power. On a daily basis, your interactions with the local and state governments were supposed to be dramatic over the federal government. I mean, you really shouldn't need to pay attention to the federal government. You look at what's going on today, and it's the complete opposite. The federal government has so much power, and they're involved in almost every aspect of our lives. A little bit about how I differ from Todd Young in that perspective is that Todd has been in the Senate for 5 years now, and he has voted for every single spending bill to cross his desk outside of 2, maybe 3 since I last checked. But he's voted to increase the size and scope of the federal government. And you look at what's going on, especially now. If your state and your local governments are accepting anything from the federal level, there's always a string attached. And that's huge. That's critical for the federal government to retain power and the state and local governments to cede power. So that's limited government. We'll go into term limits next. So I believe in a 3-2-2 term limit system, 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, and 2 terms in the presidency. Now, where I differ from Todd Young in this, I don't know that he has actually spoken out on term limits. So I don't know if I differ because I haven't heard anything from him. Mm-hmm. But I do know that he has served 3 terms in the House, and he is currently on his first term in the Senate. Now, a lot of people want term limits, and here's why. You take a look at how long politicians, and a lot of these politicians have been in office. Mitch McConnell, for example, has been in the U.S. Senate for over 35 years, and that's longer than I've been alive. I mean, there's a correlation between the longer you're in office and the less likely you are to care about your constituents. And that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, term limits, look at the reelectability of an incumbent. It's 90+%. And surprisingly, I get pushback on this more than any other of my pillars and my beliefs. I know it's shocking to me, but the strongest pushback that I get is, well, aren't elections term limits? And they are to an extent, and I would believe they would be if we actually turned out for our elections. But you take a look outside of a presidential year, you look at the turnout of elections, and it's poor. I mean, people are just not engaged. So to say that elections are term limits is completely ridiculous in my mind. So, term limits are just another check and balance for us, the citizens.
Well, you look at it, I try to take my business hat and put it into this environment. And there are limits that people can serve on boards, okay, to govern a corporation. And so, why are there limits on board of directors for boards to be able to sit on those boards? Because everyone understands that after a period of time, you need fresh blood. You need to have a different perspective. And the other very important point that you're raising here is that there is, I hate to say it, but there's cronyism that tends to cultivate from being in a position for a long period of time. And you tend to owe all these people things over a long period of time. Whereas when you come in fresh, you don't have those same ties. And it allows you to free yourself from those, from those commitments and to serve the people. And so I think it's good, what you're raising. And you look at Nancy Pelosi, and what she's doing, and she's so dead set on this very liberal agenda. Look, in Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace, we are not about politics. We are about defending the faith. And so I will pivot in a moment, but we do care about defending our freedoms, and we do care about the U.S. Constitution. because if we do not protect our Constitution, which to me goes to these issues that you're raising, then we can't defend the sanctity of life. We can't defend the sanctity of marriage or our religious freedoms, because it's all founded on what we can do in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, right? And with our president. So,
absolutely, you're raising a great point, because you may not be focused on politics, but the biggest thing is the First Amendment. I mean, that protects your ability for religion, and if you don't protect that, just look at what's happening now. Our country has no regard for the sanctity of life. Our country has no regard for the sanctity of marriage. And when you take religion out of it, it's just humans left to humans, and it's easily corruptible.
Yeah, and it's almost barbaric. So you talked about your key platform point being election integrity, and we've seen very much this play out after the presidential election, where there are states that are trying to challenge what actually happened at the ballot box in November. Whether we're seeing it from Maricopa County in Arizona, Michigan to a lesser extent, but Wisconsin, Georgia, all of these places. What is your take on this? And how would you address this? How would you address election integrity?
Yeah, so it is one of my pillars of my campaign. So as anybody can tell, even on January 6th, we had enough information to say that something's not right, that we need to take a deeper look. And obviously the courts weren't going to do something about that, whether they were lacking merit or precedent or whatever, that was the judge's decision.
Right.
But the last check on that is the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. They're the last check on, okay, let's certify the election or let's dig into it a little bit more. And unfortunately, both of our senators, Todd Young and Mike Braun, didn't. They both voted to certify the election. They did not stand up for the integrity of the election. Now, with everything that has come out in Maricopa County and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania, I mean, these things need to be addressed. My first presidential election I was able to vote in was 2012, Mitt Romney and Obama. That was the first presidential election I was able to vote in. And even then, I was hearing stories of ballot harvesting, ballot drop-off boxes, and deceased people voting. And we heard about it again in 2016. And then obviously we're hearing about it more and more in 2020. And the issue is that nobody's done anything about this.
No.
And when you don't do something about it, it just enables it to go farther the next time. So right. Now there are a few things I would love to see done. But I do want to make the point that what you do at a federal level and what you do at a state and local level, and they need to be kept separate, because the last thing you want is the federal level getting involved in the state and local elections. And so that's something I want to keep completely separate. But one thing that I am in favor of, well, two things actually that I am in favor of at the federal level. Number one, a forensic audit of every single state. And that's not just the states that we've mentioned, but Indiana too.
Indiana, why not?
Exactly. Just because, a certain candidate won or a certain party won a majority of the seats doesn't mean that it's not susceptible to fraud.
I totally agree.
You don't know unless you check. But the other big thing that I would love to see done is no federal, state, or local official be able to send an unsolicited ballot. And what that means is that's basically a ban on mail-in balloting. Not to get confused with absentee balloting. Absentee balloting, what you have to do is you, the voter, have to request a ballot from the election board. The election board verifies who you are, and then they send the ballot to you. Here's the problem with mail-in balloting. We were talking earlier, and I have a pretty big family, right? 8 kids and 2 parents. My parents were great. They made us register to vote as soon as we turned 18. Now, if Indiana has not updated its voter rolls and we did mail-in balloting, my parents would get 10 ballots sent to them. None of us live at home anymore. So where's the check in mail-in balloting? It's a free-for-all. There's no check on this system. So right. That's why banning mail-in balloting is huge. And that's something that can be done at the federal level without trampling state and local rights.
Yeah. I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but as a former auditor, it flies in the face of accuracy and fair elections when anybody can pick up a ballot from, I mean, let's say somebody moves and that ballot gets sent there. Somebody could fraudulently complete that and sign it because they're not even really truly validating the signatures, because that's come out as part of these forensic investigations from some of these states. And so, I think that has to be part of it. If they're going to have any of these mail-in ballots, there has to be a dual check system to ensure that the person that is submitting that ballot is in fact that person. Mm-hmm. And in these days of technology, there are a multitude of ways to ensure with identity, to ensure that that is in fact the person that is submitting it. So it flies in the face, but great answer.
And I would just like to point out that Indiana does a very, very good job of absentee ballots. If you pre-COVID, of course, but if you look at the rules to be eligible for an absentee ballot, you had to physically prove that you were not able to make it to the voting location on election day between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. before they would let you get an absentee ballot. So it's one of the most rigid absentee ballot requests throughout the U.S. And I honestly have no problem with it. I think we do it the best way.
Well, yeah, I agree with you because I help at one of the precincts, right, with the voting. And you're right, the steps that you have to go through to get that absentee ballot, because I was helping in a precinct where I couldn't vote. I couldn't cast my vote there. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, and that's the way it should be, because we should be casting our vote in person. That should be the norm, not the exception.
In person, and if I may, on election day.
On election day, thank you very much.
It's not
this shouldn't go on for a month. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
It's election day. Now, whether we want to make that a federal holiday or whatever we want to do with that, I'm open to ideas, but election day, not election season.
And make it accessible, allow it to be very accessible. I agree with that. So let's shift gears for a moment because you did talk about this. One of the strategic pillars of CUP is the sanctity of life. And we've seen this presidential administration in league with the U.S. House of Representatives issuing some of the most anti-life pieces of their agenda that, frankly, we have ever seen in the history of this country, by stripping out the Hyde Amendment in their spending bill. That, number one, is just appalling to me. Thank God the Senate has beat that back up till now, right? I don't know if it'll hold. We'll see, or the Women's Health Protection Act. So what I'd like to ask you is, understanding that Todd Young is good in this category, right? Because even with SBA list, he scores an A+. Help us understand what your position is and what the sanctity of life means to you, because it means different things to different people. Is it from conception to natural death? So I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you said it. It's on my website. It's a platform that I've had for a long time, but I am pro-life for the whole life from conception until natural death. And, I have to give Todd Young credit. Now, he's an opponent, but I have to give credit where credit is due. He has been one of the best senators in regards to being pro-life. If I'm elected, my goal is to be that good, to get an A+ rating. That is my goal. But you said it. It's not an issue of the women, and you'll never, ever hear me make an argument of a woman's right or anything else. It's all about protecting the child. Every single argument that I would make, it's all about the child. We live in a country where, unfortunately, society does not value human life. We see that in not only with abortion, but we see that in regards to violence all around. Simple arguments that would be settled with, words or fists are now resulting in death. And that speaks to society level, not necessarily legislative level, but at society level as a problem. We do not value human life as a society anymore. But that's something that is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. It is reassuring to see what's happening with, the Texas heartbeat law. And I would love to see that come to Indiana. Obviously, you're running for the U.S. Senate, so that's really not where you're casting your eyes. You have to be at the U.S. level, thinking about what can be done at that U.S. level. But it is important, I think, for us to take note of these states that are trying to protect life. And to your point that you raised early on, is to preserve those state rights to allow them to do these things to protect that life. And now we're seeing, because of what Texas is doing, Indiana's going to replicate this likely. Florida's going to do this. There's a slew of states that are going to do this. And it's amazing what one act, it creates a ripple effect. So
exactly. And there are a couple things that we can do. Number one, what we can do at the federal level is that we could pass a bill that says life begins at conception.
Oh, that's great.
A one sentence bill, as simple as that. You could pass that. That basically would overturn Roe v. Wade, that by itself. And because a lot of people have a misconception about Roe v. Wade and what it actually did. It did not make abortion legal. If you read the actual writings on it, what it did is, in the first trimester, it said the woman has a right to privacy, and that's it. That's all it said. And
that's right.
And from what I've seen before, the Supreme Court is not the end-all be-all. Congress can surpass the Supreme Court. I've seen that in other cases. It used to be illegal in 1895. The Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for the federal government to levy a tax on citizens' income. In 1913, they passed the 16th Amendment, which made it legal, which made the Supreme Court ruling null and void. So Congress can take this up as an issue. Even a one-sentence bill like life begins at conception can completely nullify Roe v. Wade.
Well, and to your point, and this is something we should all sit up and take notice of, if the Supreme Court in the Dobbs case that they're going to hear on December 1st, let's say it does go in the pro-life community's favor, okay? If Nancy Pelosi and her anti-life team are successful with this Women's Protection Health Protection Act, it would nullify everything that Supreme Court does. And that's why it is so important that we have senators in place to ensure that that never gets passed. So it very well said, Danny. So sanctity of marriage, this is something I really haven't heard Todd Young talk a lot about. And so I would value your input and where your views are, because the traditional marriage and family is being attacked from every direction. And so just offer us anything that you can on where you stand there.
Yeah, you won't really hear a lot of elected officials' comments on marriage anymore because they feel that the battle has already been lost.
Yes.
If you're making a comment, then you're just putting yourself in a hole, basically. But I do believe marriage is between a man and a woman. That's just how it is. I mean, you look, I've studied the definition of marriage, matrimony. Deacon Harold Burke Sivers gives a very, very good definition about it, and it's one of my favorites. But that's what I believe. Now, bringing that into government is a different animal, because the Constitution states life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. The pursuit of happiness can mean something different to everybody. I happen to know plenty of people who are not heterosexual that engage in relationships and everything, and they're great people. And I'll treat anybody the same, regardless of that type of stuff, regardless of their background or anything else. I'll treat people the same. I will promote that marriage is between a man and a woman. At the same time, I have no right to judge anybody else.
Yeah.
There's a great saying, great way it was explained to me. We are not able to convert people. We are only able to lead the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's a delicate issue, right? Because we all have friends, we have maybe family members who struggle with the sin, for instance, of homosexuality, and we know by our faith that this is something that we must oppose, right? We must consciously oppose. But to your point, our Constitution was designed to welcome all people. And I agree with you there. I do agree with you there. but from a faith perspective, you understand where I'm coming from, and you agree. I would say that making marriage legal between two men, two women, what's your position on that?
Well, I'll say this: the government should get out of the business of marriage to begin with.
Yeah.
The government, apart from tax reasons, why is the government in the business of marriage? And that solves a lot of issues, because honestly, I don't think they should be there. We've seen under the Equality Act, I believe it would go right into religious institutions, and now religious institutions cannot discriminate based off anything like that.
Right.
That's absurd. I mean, that's completely violates the First Amendment. Completely violates it.
Yeah.
Now, going back to what you said about the sin, it's one thing that I wish as Catholics, as Christians, we would be a little bit better about, because it's not the thought, right? It's not the thoughts that get people in trouble. It's the act.
Right.
Marriage is between a man and a woman, but committing those acts outside of marriage, whether it's a man and a woman or a man and a man, is just as bad. It's meant to be within marriage. And I wish that we as Christians would stand up a little bit more about that, because it's not necessarily about, homosexuality. It's about the acts being outside of marriage. Mm-hmm. And going into it, marriage is between a man and a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about critical race theory for a moment, because I've been very actively involved, because our children are the future of our society. And it seems as though they have now gone to our kids, and they're trying to indoctrinate them with theories about biased behavior, about whiteness, white supremacy, about whether or not this gender neutrality that actually is introduced into the critical race theory as well. Transgenderism, that is introduced into the critical race theory realm. So, like the things that we've just been talking about, I've honestly not seen Todd Young come out with a position on whether or not he believes that we should ban critical race theory from the schools and let parents get back to what they should be doing, which is being in the driver's seat of, taking charge of their children's, future and their education, right? I mean, they should have a huge parental control role in what is taught to them. And so I feel very strongly about this, even the catechism of the Catholic faith talks about this, because the parents know best. So what is your position on these issues?
So there's a lot to unpack here. Number one, you will not see Todd Young come out for or against it. You'll very rarely see any senator or federal official come out for or against it. It is very rare, because it's typically at the state level is where this is going to get done, and not even at the state level, at the local level. So it's very, very rare that a federal official would actually get involved in this. However, I'm not like that. So I'm completely against critical race theory. Now, critical race theory, if you want to teach the history of the country, if you want to teach slavery did exist, we have to accept our backgrounds. You want to teach the civil rights movement, you want to teach the Civil War, I'm all for that, because as much history as we can get in there, that just makes us better. It makes our children better and able to overcome more than even our generations are. Now, where they overstep the line is, as you mentioned, white privilege, white guilt, treating people differently as a color of their skin, treating them differently. That's wrong. We have taken so many good steps since the civil rights movement in the 1960s, yet somehow we're claiming that we're a racist nation. I don't understand it. Either the civil rights movement was wrong or they were right. And if they were right, then I don't understand how we can be a racist nation. And if they were wrong, well, then we have to learn from how they were wrong.
Right.
But it's one or the other. Critical race theory being involved in our schools, if you don't think it's indoctrination, let me just give you an example of how they go after kids for this. The National Hockey League wanted to institute helmets in the professional level just as a precaution, right, as safety. Now, they knew if they were just going to go to professional players, they were never going to do it. How did they do it? They started it with the youth leagues. as a kid. So by the time that they were in the professional league, by the time they were in high school, college, professional league, they were used to wearing the helmet. Now, it was a safety precaution, but it's just to demonstrate this is how you indoctrinate people to a certain lifestyle is you start with the kids because
Absolutely.
then they're used to it.
Yeah.
Now, critical race theory, I'm against it, but the last thing that I want to see is a law going in saying that it's banned. And here's why. Because as soon as you do that, so many people are going to say, yay, we won, and they're going to go home. Well, here's the history of critical race theory. As soon as they face a battle and they lose, they take it back, they repackage it, put it under a different name, and then reintroduce it into the schools. So if you ban it at the state level or at the federal level, people are going to think, okay, we won the fight, time to go home. But then what they're going to do is they're going to repackage it and put it right back in the curriculum. And there's going to be no problem solved.
I call it the whack-a-mole theory.
Exactly.
Because you're hitting one and another one pops up and they just put it under a different terminology. I mean, this is what they're doing in Carmel schools. They're claiming they're not using critical race theory. They've just rebranded it and are using different language to basically indoctrinate the children the same way. And it's diabolical is what it is. But they're determined to do it. But I do think that the key here is the parental control and disclosure, right? But to this point, because I know enough to be dangerous on this topic, Danny. So the fact that the Biden administration, along with the Department of Education at the national level, has said we will incorporate critical race theory into the schools. They made it a national issue. Okay. And then the teachers union came out and said, we will adopt critical race theory in the schools. And teachers said, even if the law is passed, sign this petition saying you're going to teach it anyway in the classroom. So something has to be done nationally to counteract the presidential administration and the Department of Education. You see my point?
So here's where this gets interesting, because even after all these edicts go through, the school board, the local school board, has the end all on curriculum. They have the end say. Now, why they go certain directions could be because of a financial incentive given by the federal level.
It is that way.
Exactly. So this goes back to what we said at the very beginning of this conversation. Was what are the strings attached to this federal money that's coming? You start reducing government spending and you're going to get rid of so much of this stuff. It has a downhill effect. Now, your school board can completely say, we don't want to follow the federal level. We don't even want to follow the state level. We have a whole bunch of parents in our community that want us to put this curriculum in. We're going to put this curriculum in. That's a control that I never want to give up, because especially here in Carmel, all we have to do is elect our school board officials that we get to elect, and they're the end all be all. By Indiana state law, the school board has the end say on curriculum. That's Indiana law. So, you also look at, and this leads me into something that a lot of people push me towards, is getting rid of the federal Department of Education. One thing that I would say is, I haven't really decided, getting rid of it versus keeping it. But what I can say is this: if you took their entire annual budget and you just gave it to every public school teacher, K through 12, throughout the United States, every public school teacher would be making $9,000 more every year. We complain a lot about teacher pay and how teachers need to be paid more. Well, it's an allocation of resources, really.
That's interesting. That is a very interesting perspective. Yeah, that's great. The problem is the teachers are in league, with the National Teachers Union, with the Department of Education. So that is an excellent point. I like the theory of reallocating the dollars. I really like that theory, Danny. So, okay.
Exactly. And it really helps, because it's not like you're cutting the Department of Education. You're just giving that money elsewhere.
Right. It's not a defund platform. It's moving, and to a certain extent, Indiana has somewhat done this, because they've said the dollars attached to the child. And therefore, if a parent decides they're not going to tolerate what they're doing in these schools anymore, the money goes with the child and the child can withdraw from that school system.
Mhm.
And so to a certain extent, I like what you're saying because it does work. And enough parents have to exercise that control, right? To make that work. But yeah. So lastly, and I think very importantly, we've seen our religious freedoms stripped. From government, we've seen this in the military, we've seen this in businesses, within even the schools, with colleges, with these vaccine mandates. And whether you are pro-vaccine or not, okay, this is not about whether you're for the vaccine or not for the vaccine. This is about a mandate to force somebody to do something that may be against their religious, beliefs, and then not granting religious exemptions. So this is what's happening now in many of these employers, even in the military, or they're making it so onerous for somebody to be granted this religious exemption. We're even seeing this in churches. Cardinal Supich in Chicago has said that no priest can continue to say mass, or a seminarian cannot be made a priest if he's not vaccinated. And there will be no religious exemptions. None. That is appalling to me, but that's what's going on. So what's your position on this matter?
Yeah, I am anti-mandate. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not anti-mask. My position has always been and will always be, if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. And if you don't, don't. That's your choice. The same with the vaccine. If you want to get vaccinated, get vaccinated. I have no problem with that. And if you don't, I'm the same way. I'm going to treat you the same either way. I know plenty of people. I have plenty of friends who have gotten vaccinated. I have plenty that refuse. For whatever, whether it's a religious belief, whether it's something else, it doesn't matter. It's absurd to me. And you were pointing out, this is the first time I've heard of what you were saying, but that's absurd to me, because what you're doing is you're reducing anything that a person has, right? Whether it's job related. If it's job related, you're reducing their entire performance, their entire contribution to a company, what they do. You're reducing it to whether or not they put a needle in their arm. For people who are, for priests and seminarians who are going to serve God, right? They're making sacrificing their lives to serve God. You're reducing everything that they want to do for God to, will they stick a needle in their arm or not? And it really, I'll go back to the beginning of the data since the beginning of COVID. If you are 55 and younger, you have a 95% chance, if you get COVID, that you will recover without going to the hospital. If you go to the hospital, then you have a 99.9% chance of recovery. So if you're 55 and younger, there should be no mandate. Even with the vaccine, you can still get COVID, you can still transmit COVID. So they call this the vaccine. I like to call it a booster shot because it does boost your immune system. It does. If you get COVID, your symptoms may not be as severe. You have a greater chance of recovery. Like I said, if you get the vaccine, I'm not anti-vaccine. If you get it, great. And if you don't want to, great. It's your decision. I had that. I had a conversation with my doctor, and we came to the conclusion that, we don't understand the 5-year and 10-year data on this. We don't know the long-term effects. So for somebody in my position, weighing the short term and the long term, it didn't make sense to get vaccinated. So that's where I'm at. But I'll tell you this. So I live in Carmel, and Carmel city government was they put a proposal that as new hires, as a condition of employment, would have to be vaccinated. It was going to be mandatory. And a few people got wind of it, and they knew who I was. So they reached out to me and they asked me to speak at a city council meeting. And I got a group of about 5 people or so together, and we spoke. And what I said was exactly that. You're reducing the amount of service that somebody wants to contribute to our community to whether or not they stick a needle in their arm. And the fact of the matter is, if it does come out that there are long-term effects from this, who's going to be on the hook for it?
Yeah.
It's going to be the people who made it mandatory. So, it's whether it's a religious belief, whether it's a personal belief, or whether you have scientific data to back it up, I'm anti-mandate.
Yeah, I think it's gotten to a point where when the government and these organizations take control of our bodies, we've lost this country. And this is the end stage towards socialism. when they say they have control over your body. And so people should be fighting these mandates. And thank God that we have people, from the airlines that are actually challenging this and that are going to court, to battle these mandates. We need more courageous people to stand up and fight for this, even if it means losing their jobs, even if it means that, because we cannot stand by and let these people, run roughshod over us. So yeah, I mean, and in the Catholic faith, we know that all three of these shots are abortion tainted. And so if you are truly pro-life, it is incredibly challenging to overcome the obstacle that presents and to put that into your body. And so, yet they're forcing you to do that. So it's diametrically opposed to our moral framework. So anyway, Danny, as I know we've been going on here, as I understand it, you need 500 signatures from throughout the 9 congressional Indiana districts for the May primary to be on the ballot. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So can you share with our supporters how they can support you in that effort?
Absolutely. So I've been traveling across the state for the better part of 4 months now, gathering these signatures. And like you said, it's 500 signatures in each congressional district. And the real caveat of it is that they have to be registered voters. So it's not just 500 random people in every district. You have to be a registered voter for it to count. Now, how you can help, as I'm traveling across the state, I have people and I meet people who will get signatures for me, and they want to help out with this. They know their friends want to sign the petition. There's 2 ways that you can do it. If you reach out to me on the website, dannyforhoosiers.com, DANNYFOR Hoosiers.com, there's a contact us portion on there. And if you just let me know where you are, whenever I have an event in your area, I'll come gather the signature. The other way that you can do it is there's a ballot signatures tab on the website, and it's really neat. What it is it's a downloadable PDF version of the form, and there's instructions on the website of how to fill it out. The only downside to it is that you have to get the form back to me. So if you want to mail it to the PO box that's listed on the website and the form, that's how I'll get it.
So does it have to be a wet signature? So they have to mail you the hard copy, or can they email it to you?
No, it has to be a wet signature. So
okay.
I have to have the hard copy.
Okay, I understand. All right, so folks, you heard that. You heard Danny's platform today, and hopefully it moves some hearts. What he's asking is just to be able to be on the ballot, right? This is all his ask is, to be on the ballot. And last time I checked, our election should be fair and open for those that want to serve our country. And so I implore upon you to support Danny and his efforts to enter onto that primary ballot in May of 2022 to run against Todd Young. And so any last words that you'd like to share for our supporters?
Well, thank you for having me, Vicki. I've really appreciated it. The one thing that I will add is that I'm open to any and all questions. As I've been traveling across the state, you wouldn't believe how many great people I've met, people who just come from all different backgrounds. And the one thing I will say that differs me from anybody else is that I actually want to get to know people. I actually want to engage with the voters and speak with the voters, and most elected officials don't. They prefer to hide behind TV advertisements and radio commercials, and I prefer to get in front of people. And I'm not afraid of answering any question. Believe me, there have been questions from across the board that I never thought I would be asked to answer, but I've answered all questions that come my way.
That's excellent. Danny, this has been a delight getting to know you better and to know what your platform is. I think it's going to be exciting to see you on that ballot in May 2022. Thank you so much for spending such a generous amount of time with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.